Let's go ahead and bring Senator Lee right on the line with us right now. Senator, welcome, and thank you for working with us this morning. I know you had to head into was it a Judiciary Committee meeting?
Yes. I just came back from a Judiciary Committee hearing with Attorney General Holder. But it's good to be with you, Doug.
Senator, let's chat for just a moment. First of all, can I just tell you that of the speeches I heard last night, especially the quote-unquote rebuttal speeches, yours was the best. I have to tell you, I was quite disappointed with the GOP response. You know, the president has all the pomp and circumstance, so that's kind of, in a whole different realm. But I was really quite impressed with your speech last night.
Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate that a lot, and it's important at moments like these to point out that the nation and the Republican Party, for that matter, are not necessarily always quite as divided as a lot of people in power would have you think. There are a lot of areas where we do agree, a lot of other areas where we can quickly reach agreement if we set our minds toward it. And so much of what I had to say last night related to how best to unify the country behind some simple, easy steps we can take to help improve and enhance economic opportunity in America, especially among the poor and the middle class.
I heard the president talk about the gaps. I heard Kathy McMorris Rodgers talk about the gaps. I heard you talk about the gaps, but you got specific, and I thought it was really interesting when you talked about this inequality crisis presents itself in three principal forms. It went through it identified, and then I was really impressed at the fact that you went through step by step folks that are back there, who are actually doing X. You named them. John Cornyn. You talked about Senator Rand Paul. You talked about Marco Rubio. You talked about Paul Ryan, Jim Jordan, Tom Graves. I mean, the list went on and on about them and what specifically they were doing.
Yeah, it's important to do that from time to time because sometimes people don't realize what specific pieces of legislation are out there. And once they become aware of them, and when you put them together in that kind of format so that they can see how they all fit together, how they can all be used to help address this inequality crisis, this economic opportunity crisis that we're facing. Unless you put it forward in that way, people aren't necessarily going to be aware of some of these alternatives that we have.
I thought it was interesting, too, and I think this is an evolutionary thing, and I may be reading too much into it, but, I've observed what the Tea Party has done. I've observed what you have done over the years, and I was taken by the fact that you made the case that it's one thing to throw the tea in the harbor. It's another thing to finally show up at Philadelphia and really not just protest anymore, but get something done.
Yeah, that's right. I started this in November 2010. On election night, I explained that we have our Boston moments where we protest against the kind of government we don't want. But I went on to explain that we've got to start moving toward Philadelphia. Doesn't mean that we won't have Boston moments along the way. Those are necessary. We have to continue to call out bad government policy when we confront it. But we also have to reach a point at which we get behind something and we express, we articulate, we embrace that which we are for in government. And I think that's where we can achieve the greatest results. And I think this was an important moment last night because I was trying to speak to a group of people who have felt alienated by both political parties, who don't feel that they've been well represented by either the Republicans or the Democrats. And this was an attempt to reach out to those people.
I thought it was interesting, and I've heard this in one form or another from everybody I've chatted with this morning, from Senator Hatch just moments ago to Congressman Bishop. We chatted with him in our first hour. The idea of just pulling so much power into a centralized government, and a government that is deemed and felt by many of the people represented that it is somewhat not only distant from them but alienated from them. And I thought your example of the government that our founding fathers dealt with, that was not only not receptive, but was a long way away in London. I think more and more people are beginning to feel that way about Washington.
Yeah, that's right. It's a sad reality, but we've learned over time through experience that when people get power, sometimes they abuse that power. And so that's why the experience that our founding fathers had is relevant to what we face today, in the sense that they came to fear the excessive accumulation of power in the hands of the few. And so from time to time, it's important for us to revisit some of those same historical circumstances that led to the creation of our Constitution. It'll help us remember why it is that we need to focus on keeping power close to home whenever we can, keeping power diffused, keeping most of the political battles within the states and in local governments. And it reminds us of the fact that our most important battles, Doug, are not necessarily Republican versus Democrat or liberal versus conservative. They're simply American principles. This kind of approach, one that focuses on federalism, one that focuses on the sort of distribution of power at the local level, will allow more Americans to get more of the kind of government that they want. You know, you might have people in Vermont who want a single-payer health care system, and they could do that more effectively if we followed this approach.
I've always felt that when it comes to the health care reform, the things that I've heard locally, I was actually on the United Way committee. I worked on a little different area. I worked on economic education, where many worked on health care. But I remember the wonderful ideas that I heard there. I've heard Mitt Romney talk about the fact that, yeah, you know what we might need in Massachusetts could be very different than what is needed, but it ought to be up to the states. Maybe there could be some federal guidelines and things of that nature, but it ought to be up to the states. And I've appreciated that tone. One other quick thing and honestly, over the years, you and I have had some entertaining conversations, energetic conversations, and occasionally we have disagreed. But I will tell you this, I wish this speech had been the official response from the GOP, not taking anything away, although I was underwhelmed by Cathy McMorris Rodgers' speech last night. I wish this had been the official response. Do you feel, Senator, that having so many responses, and especially at a more official level like yours and Representative McMorris Rodgers, does that dilute the conservative message? Does it dilute in any way the conservative message, the rebuttal, as it were, to the president?
No, I don't think it does, Doug, and the reason is that I think that the answer to a lot of the problems we face in government is not fewer opinions, it's more opinions. And among conservatives, I think we need more opinions expressed. And
I would agree with that, Senator, but I'm kind of thinking under one tent, and perhaps this was but when it is portrayed by the media, and I think fairly, these are differing points of view. I think people walk away. Well, we heard the official GOP response, and we know Mike Lee is a Republican, but it was kind of the Tea Party response, and I cannot tell you how many pundits last night underscored that this again indicates the rift in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think some of the pundits maybe want that to be true. But, there's always kind of some tension between a political party's base and its establishment leaders. But this agenda, this conservative reform agenda that I was talking about last night, is about building bridges among and between Republicans from across the country, and also just among and between Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, recognizing that, again, a lot of people feel like they've been left out of both political parties. They don't feel like they have a clear place either among Republicans or Democrats. So, and all of this at the same time, I think, helps give Utah a bigger voice in Washington, and this was a good opportunity for me to do that.
Oh, one final quick thing. I'm, as I alluded to, I'm aware. Because of adjusting both of our schedules to accommodate something, I'm aware that you were in this meeting, and we actually have this soundbite. I'd like you to paint the picture for us here.
General Holder, I respectfully but forcefully disagree with the assertion, if this is what you're saying, that because the number of executive orders issued by this president might be comparable to the number of executive orders issued by previous presidents, that means that he hasn't made more use of it than other presidents have.
I thought that was a most interesting moment because, this was brought up last night, too, that, the number of executive orders from Mr. Obama is not the same as Mr. Clinton and Mr. Reagan and things of that nature. Give us a little background. That was a powerful moment in your questioning.
Yeah, so what I was trying to point out to the Attorney General is that a lot of people are concerned by this president's use of executive authority, and it really has far less to do with the number of executive orders than with what he has done through executive orders. The fact that he has made rather significant changes to the Immigration Code, to the Affordable Care Act, and to various other provisions of law that are really significant. And you look at the sheer volume of regulatory text coming out of this administration. Last year's Federal Register, which is the cumulative yearly index of new federal regulations, 80,000 pages. Now, many of these are regulations that carry the force of law. You compare that to the number of pages of statutory text passed by Congress last year, was about 800. Now, some would say that's 800 pages too many, but regardless, 80,000 pages. And a lot of this executive action that we're talking about is directly contravening statutes passed by Congress. So, for example, the president's decision not to enforce the employer mandate while holding hardworking Americans accountable for complying with the individual mandate. It's not fair, but it's also contrary to law. I was asking the Attorney General what the president's basis of authority was, and he wasn't prepared to give it to me then, and so I asked him to give it to me in writing if he couldn't give it right then. Mm-hmm. But this is an important problem, Doug. This is something that all Americans ought to be worried about. And once again, I want to make very clear, this is not a Republican or a Democratic problem. I've been critical in the past of presidents in both political parties who have abused their executive power as presidents. We've got to prevent that from happening. This has got to stop.
Senator, I've kept you longer than we had indicated, but thank you for joining us here at KSL News Radio. I like some of the tone that I'm hearing. I think there's so much that can be accomplished, and I do appreciate you joining us here on the program today, and I appreciated your response last night.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's great to be with you.